Since the war between the US, Israel and Iran kicked off a few weeks ago, arguably Iran's most effective form of retaliation has been to essentially close the Strait of Hormuz, through which something like 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas usually passes. This has been great news for Iran. The subsequent disruption has pushed up global oil prices, but Iran has still been able to export its own oil through the strait, and is exporting as many barrels as it was before the war. Furthermore, since the US withdrew sanctions from Iranian oil in a desperate attempt to bring down global prices, Iran no longer sells its oil at a discount, and The Economist claims that Iran is now making nearly twice as much from oil sales as it was in February. Conversely, it's been pretty terrible news for Iran's Gulf neighbours, who have had to suddenly look for other routes to export their oil. However, in the past week or so, the number of non-Iranian ships transiting the strait has started to tick back up ever so slightly, after Iran's foreign ministry put out a statement saying that vessels from non-hostile states, a list that apparently includes China, Russia, India, Iraq and Pakistan, will be allowed to pass through, albeit, quote, in coordination with the Iranian authorities. Interestingly, however, most of these ships haven't gone through the usual route. Instead, they've had to transit through a narrow passage at the northernmost point of the strait, between two heavily militarized Iranian islands. So in this video, we're going to explain why this is happening, and how it apparently fits into a wider Iranian ploy to create a sort of toll system in the strait. President Erdogan was ranked 19th in our list of the world's most influential people. So in the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, we discuss how his various foreign policy gambles apparently paid off, and how he's been able to consolidate power within Turkey over the past year or so. That's just one of the 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So to understand this story, you need to know what the Strait of Hormuz actually looks like. At the narrowest point between Iran's Larak Island and Oman's northernmost tip, the strait is only about 50 kilometers wide. Before the war, basically all commercial traffic passing through the strait transited through this gap, just because it's, well, the easiest and quickest way through. However, in the past couple of weeks or so, the handful of non-Iranian ships Iran has actually allowed to pass have had to take a different route. Instead, they've had to go north, between the Larak and Keshem Islands. Both of these islands are heavily militarized, and there have also been reports that Iran is charging effectively a $2 million toll fee for at least some of these ships. Unsurprisingly, this hasn't gone down well with the Gulf states, who rely on passage through the Strait of Hormuz to export much of their oil and gas. Which is why, last week, as this new scheme was becoming apparent, the Gulf Cooperation Council released a statement insisting that it was illegal under international law, something which was then seconded by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And, well, they're probably right, given that the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea requires the relevant states to guarantee transit passage. In other words, let other ships pass for free through any major strait. Unfortunately for Marco Rubio, however, the US isn't the best place to prosecute this argument, both because the Trump administration doesn't generally pay much heed to international law, and because the US is one of just a handful of states which have actually refused to ratify the convention. Nor is there much the US can do about it. Iran can essentially force every ship transiting the strait to use their new toll booth just by mining the rest of the strait, which would be incredibly cheap and easy for Iran to do, but would require an expensive and lengthy anti-mining operation to be undone. There's some evidence that this is already happening. Last week there were reports that Iran had laid a dozen or so mines across the main bit of the strait. This isn't enough to permanently disrupt shipping through the strait, and Iran could very easily do a lot more if it decided to, so it should probably be interpreted as a threat rather than something more permanent. However, at least some Iranian officials have signaled that they intend to make this the new normal, even after the war. An advisor to Iran's new supreme leader has spoken of a new regime for the Strait of Hormuz after the war. And last week, Iran's Fars news agency reported that Iranian lawmakers were working on a draft bill to formalize the toll system, which would de facto make it permanent. If this were to become the new normal, it would be incredibly lucrative for Iran. For context, before the war, something like 40 commercial ships passed through the strait every day, with about half of them carrying oil or LNG. If every ship was required to pay a toll of $2 million per tanker, that would net Iran about $80 million a day, or about $2.5 billion a month, valuable foreign currency. Even if the toll only applied to ships carrying oil and gas, that would still come to over $1 billion a month. For context, this would be more than the $800 million or so that Egypt usually gets from the Suez Canal, and would substantially improve Iran's public finances, given total tax revenues only came to about $14 billion last financial year. If this were to happen, Middle Eastern exporters would probably try and reduce their reliance on the strait, but this would be a long-term project, and in the short term, there aren't really any viable alternatives, which is why the global economy is having such a tough time at the moment. Furthermore, there's been some suggestions that Iran could even use this proverbial toll booth to put pressure on the dollar's reserve status. For context, the US dollar has long been the world's favorite reserve currency. That is, the currency that financial institutions prefer to hold in reserve, and the currency that thus dominates international trade. Some commentators argue that the dollar's reserve status has been buttressed by the fact that trade in oil, which remains the energetic basis of modern economies, is generally done in dollars, and oil exporters have a habit of investing these dollars into US government bonds. This is a process known as petrodollar recycling, and at least some people think that it reinforces the dollar's reserve status by establishing US government bonds as effectively the world's reserve debt instrument. Anyway, there's been some reports in the past couple of days, including one from CNN citing a senior Iranian official, that Iran is considering only allowing oil tankers through the strait if their oil is denominated in yuan rather than dollars. While talk of the dollar's demise is generally overdone, it's at least fair to say that this could put pressure on its dominant status as the world's reserve currency, and help to accelerate the global adoption of Chinese financial infrastructure, which would in turn make it easier for Iran to avoid Western sanctions. Now, there are a lot of big players involved in this story, and it's no secret that the world we live in is run by big players like these, but not just in the world of politics. Big companies also have a complete monopoly over the world we live in, and avoiding them is kind of out of our control, as they seep into every part of our day-to-day life. But what if we told you that you could get some of that control back, starting with your email? I know you're thinking, my email? How much will that actually help? Well, your email is personal to you, and it's important to keep hold of what's yours. Most messaging apps make sure to let you know that your messages are end-to-end encrypted. So why do emails deserve any less? Well, thankfully, Proton Mail offers a solution to this. It's a private, secure alternative to big companies like Gmail, and will give you everything you need to be productive while also keeping those pesky ads away from your inboxes. Although it's more than just the annoying ads, it's the fact that every single person is born with privacy, but now that privacy is essentially non-existent because of our digital world. Today, children begin building their digital identity before they're even born, without them even having a choice. Email inboxes weren't created to protect children. They were designed to collect data and feed that information into AI systems that will shape the way they're categorized and targeted for life. That's where Proton Mail's Born Private campaign comes in, as they offer a complete generational reset, giving you the opportunity to reserve an email account for your child. Their account can easily be reserved today, and it can be secured and protected for up to 15 years. This will give your child a secure digital start from day one, as when they're ready, their inbox is waiting, private, clean, and fully theirs. So if you want to take back your privacy, or protect the future privacy of your family, start using Proton Mail for free using our link at proton.me/bp/TLDR, and you'll be one step closer to a fully protected online experience, free from data exploitation.